Hello and welcome to the course. I'm your host today, Julie, and I'm speaking with Harry Davis from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Professor Davis is a professor of creative management at the Booth School, where he focuses on leadership, strategy, creativity, and innovation. He was a trustee and member of the executive committee of the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, and he was also on the board of governors at Argonne National Laboratory. He has consulted for many organizations, including ABB, the Boston Consulting Group, Monsanto, and the Terra Museum of Art. He is here today to talk about his career path and how he became a University of Chicago professor. Welcome to the course, Professor Davis.
It's very good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Can you start us off by giving us a general overview of your career path, specifically from college years to being a professor at University of Chicago? Can you kind of walk us through how you got to where you are today?
It's a good question because I think sometimes we think that careers and journeys are predictable. I've been attending many convocation speeches where people get up to speak and say, I never predicted I'd be standing up here today because when I was younger, my career, I had very, very little idea how it would unfold. And I think part of the issue for those of us in the academic world is there's no one path when planning a career. It really depends so much on the person, the time, the institution, obviously, and one's field. For me, I think paths emerge and perhaps become clearer over time. To illustrate, I never expected to spend my entire professional life as a professor when I was in college. I never expected the time to be at one institution, let alone at the University of Chicago. And I guess whoever thought that on June 30th, 2023, I would have been on the faculty here for 6 decades. One of my daughters thinks that I'm unusual, or sometimes she says weird, to say the least. I've also been married to the same woman for 6 decades. I think I expected that, but that's been a wonderful journey. So, in reflecting on this journey, I thought what might be relevant to those who are interested in becoming involved in an academic institution, either as a student, graduate, or undergraduate, as well as a faculty member that might be thinking about becoming an academic. And I guess I would think first about the choices I've made and the reasons for these choices. And second, the experience of working and collaborating with others. We all make choices and sometimes struggle with what we're supposed to do versus what it is that we want to do. It's up to us, I believe, to think about the rationale for the many choices that we make each day. And, the work we do, almost without regard to what field we're in, is inherently interpersonal. It's not productive to believe that one's reputation in the eyes of others is not at all relevant. It's very, very relevant. So I could share a few of the choices that I've made over my career. I entered an MBA program at the Tuck School at Dartmouth and enjoyed it very, very much. I was in a class taught by Professor Hennessy, who I really admired. It was a course on kind of human behavior and organizational behavior. And we were discussing a case involving whether one should fire somebody or take some other action. We were all young at the time. None of us had had any business experience. And the discussion was really interesting. And we were all very engaged. And Professor Hennessy was very skillful in engaging all of us in the conversation. And I'll always remember, I thought to myself, does he get paid to do this? It was clearly a dumb question. Of course he was getting paid. But I think what was going on for me is that I thought, I want to do what he does because he was having fun and we were enjoying it and learning a lot. Now, I couldn't just thought that, but without a lot of thinking, I followed him out of the class behind him some way until he got to his office, and I knocked on the door and I said, Professor Hennessy, would it make any sense for me to get a PhD so I could do what you do? And he smiled at me and said, of course, Harry. I'll be glad to write letters of recommendation. So that's how it started. I never thought about getting a PhD. I was planning to go and work for a large company like my father, but he was an unexpected role model that connected in me something that was truly who I was.
It's a theme I've heard a lot in this series is having these people, professors or other mentors who really connect with a person at a critical time in their life. And I'm kind of curious, even before this experience of meeting this professor, what were things that you felt very passionate about that when you were younger, even middle or high school, that kind of primed you for this experience of meeting this professor and seeing the way that he spoke about his subject and engaged the students that made that feel so compelling to you? I'm wondering, what was it about your experience thus far in life that made that so striking?
I think I've always enjoyed being in a classroom. I find it interesting even today that I can remember the names of all of my primary school teachers, starting when I was 6 years old. And some of them, I think teachers are role models in so many ways. And teachers can be role models in a very positive way to help us penetrate a topic, engage in conversation that really helps us really internalize issues that are put on the table. Or teachers can distance us from the content and from them. And so I've always seen the role of teacher as being a powerful role. And I suspect going forward, even at that age, I was intrigued with that particular archetype of a teacher. And I paid a lot of attention to teachers. I enjoyed being in the classroom. I mean, I didn't always get A's. I got different grades, but I found the learning environment of grade school and high school and college to be very, very stimulating.
So then what was the path like from this moment where you asked your professor, would it make sense for me to get a PhD? Was it pretty linear from there? Did you go right away and get a PhD? What were kind of the next steps for you?
Well, I mean, it was a different era. We didn't have internet, and it was actually in June when we graduated. And today, I don't think a lot of people would apply to PhD programs in July and expect to start in the fall. But in those days, that was possible. And I had grown up in the Midwest in Chicago and gone to school in the East. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go to school on the West Coast and have a different geographic experience. So I applied to Stanford, Berkeley, UCLA, I believe, the University of Washington. And for some reason, I applied to Northwestern in Chicago. And I was traveling around the country that summer with my roommate from our MBA program. And I got to stop off at those institutions on the West Coast. For some reason, even though I'd grown up in Chicago, I had never visited Northwestern or Chicago. And so one day I went up to Evanston and looked at Northwestern. I thought to myself, this would be a great place to be a student. And then I went to the University of Chicago, and I was really impressed with the architecture and the faculty I met. But for some reason, I said to myself, this would be a great place to be a faculty member. I'm not sure I want to be a student here. Sort of a long story short, I was accepted in all of these places, and I ended up going to Northwestern. And it was a very, very good decision.
And then was Chicago your first job? How did you end up being a professor? And tell me a little bit about why you ended up at University of Chicago and in the specific field that you're in.
I remember pulling up on the Midway at the University of Chicago, driving, and I was very struck with the architecture. And I had this sort of gut feeling that this was a real university. It wasn't pretending to be anything other than great as a university. And turns out that I was working with a professor at Northwestern who had a colleague at Chicago, and I got to meet him. And he asked me one day, would you have any interest in, now that you're getting close to finishing your PhD, to join the faculty here? And I said, absolutely. So that's how it started. And the University of Chicago has always felt like home for me. And I've been extraordinarily lucky and fortunate that I found a place where, in so many ways, I could flourish.
Tell me a little bit about your area of expertise, specifically the research you're doing, and what is most exciting to you about the specific subject that you study.
I started at Chicago teaching marketing, where my PhD was from Northwestern. And I taught marketing for and did research in marketing for more than 20 years. My dissertation had to do with families making consumer decisions. A lot of the work that had been done prior to what I did was focused on an individual in the family describing what they were purchasing. And I had the sense, being a sociologist, that there was more of a group decision making. And that's how I started. I was always very, very interested in the classroom and how to really create meaningful learning experiences. And sort of one choice that I have continued to sort of make over my career was a tendency to say yes more than saying no when somebody said, "Would you be interested in doing X, whatever that might be?" And one day, probably when I had been here 15 or 16 years, I was asked if I wanted to have a lunch with an advertising executive who had an idea for teaching a course on new product development. And so apparently two other faculty members had said no. I decided to have lunch. It was more than a free lunch. I thought it'd be kind of interesting. And he thought that we might find a firm, and in fact, he had a firm, which was Kraft, might be interested in letting a group of students actually develop a new product for them, something that would be of interest to them. And nothing like this had really ever happened before. And so I literally went around the school and talked to students and asked them if they'd be interested in taking a 2-quarter course on new product development. And they did, and it was the beginning of what became a lot of experiential education in the business school at Chicago. And I said yes, sort of halfway through my time at Chicago, when dean that was thinking of joining and becoming dean of the business school asked me if I would be interested in joining him in the dean's office. And again, I said yes. I said to him, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "I'm not sure. Just come and join me and we'll figure it out." And I spent 10 years in that role. And that role had a very significant impact on my life and in my understanding of the business school, the understanding of the university, and to some extent, the understanding of myself, because I realized that I had a lot of entrepreneurial interests. I don't like to just come up with ideas. I like to take an idea and see it come to life. And so I did that for 10 years and then decided not to return to marketing. But I was interested, having been in that leadership role, in both strategy and also in terms of leadership. How do you get people aligned to move in a given direction? And so that's been sort of the third part of my academic life. Different fields, different roles, obviously, from professor to dean, back to professor. And now I continue to do that work with a new course called the Leadership Studio.
I know you also do some consulting, which I imagine also kind of scratches that same entrepreneurial itch if you're looking to do something a little more creative. Can you tell me about the other roles that you have had that aren't necessarily teaching or academic in that way? What else do you do and how does that contribute to your overall work life?
A lot of people when they're in the academic world use that as a way to develop connections outside. And I think that is important, but I think at the same time, one has to be careful because one can spend too much time outside and not enough time with other faculty members and with students. I have been on some boards of directors, both in the private and the public sector. I think one that was associated with the university and was very important for me was Argonne National Laboratory, which is one of the country's distinguished research laboratories. And I learned also a lot about research, strategy in very complex organization that has both an academic foundation to it, but also the desire to translate discoveries into things that are useful for the country. I was on the board of a public company that went into bankruptcy, which was a very significant learning experience. And I was on the board of a family company in the insurance industry that also had to go through a transition to sell and become a public company. So those experiences outside the university have certainly enriched stories and perspectives that I have, which I certainly share in some ways with students.
What would you say is your favorite part about the academic side of your role, about teaching? I know we've touched on a few things, but I want to go a little deeper into it. What would you say is the most fulfilling part about teaching in the classroom?
I have a very strong commitment to try to do things that are useful for students. And I, to some extent, see my role as a teacher as trying to push students to change in various ways or to transform a bit in terms of the way they think about the world. And I find that the classroom can be a place of deep learning and commitment. And it also can be a place of boredom and insecurity for students. So I try to create an environment where we can be honest, be a bit vulnerable, ask tough questions, have debates on issues where there isn't a particular answer I'm looking for, but try to help people go deeper into it. One of the things that I'm doing in this current class, working with a group of other people, is really brought together a lot of what I've worked on, some of what I've written, also some of the experiences I've had to help them think about the performance aspect of leadership. I was very lucky to collaborate with a student that came to Chicago when I was in the dean's office named Barbara Lane Brown. And she had spent 25 years in theater, but for some reason decided to get an MBA. She wanted to make a transition in her own life. And we became friends, and she was also fascinated in leadership and teaching questions. What does it mean to teach? And so I asked her to create a program, help me create a program to help some of our faculty that were struggling in the classroom. And that has led to a lot of work that I've done in really helping people develop more of the talents that they really have using metaphors from theater, because I do think that leadership is a performance art in many ways. And this current studio class really encourages students to buy into that framework, but also then to really apply the scientific method in testing new ways for them to behave, to learn what works and what doesn't work, or in what situations some things work and in another situation it might work differently. And I'm just actually now reading their final reflection papers. And it's not about me, but I can't tell you how many of the students have said that this course had more impact on my life than any course I've had for a very, very long time, because they found something in it that really spoke to issues that they really needed to grapple with in preparing for complicated, unpredictable careers in their lives.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. A great training opportunity for students.
One of the things I would say is when people ask me why I do what I do, and I remember reading a wonderful op-ed piece by David Brooks, and he wrote a piece called "Being on the Edge of the Inside." And what he was saying is that people that have made a difference respect the organization that they're a part, but they're somewhat on the edge of it, meaning that they're not totally involved in everything going on inside, but also have antennas out for what's going on in the world around. And when I read that, I thought to myself, that says a lot about me. I have a deep respect for this university and the business school. I admire its core values, its mission. And those are things inside, and I really internalize those. But I also want the freedom from those internal silos and all that political side of the school and the university to be open to voices outside of the organization, having freedom to explore and to explore in ways that people say, why are you wasting your time? I've realized in some ways, I've never really wasted my time, because things I might have thought in the moment were a waste of time turn out later on to be actually very valuable. And I think that role can at times be a little lonely, because you often start things by yourself. But the only way you get things to move forward is to get other people to join in and move forward. And particularly in the dean's office and in the work that I'm currently doing, I've been incredibly fortunate to have people, whether they're faculty or students or alums, to join in to co-create things together. And it's very exciting.
Is there anything that you don't love about your career, specifically about being a professor or working in a really academic setting? Is there anything that is a challenge for you?
Well, I think there are two sides of one's life. The other is family. We have four children and now quite a number of grandchildren. And I even have a great grandson. I think my commitment to my career and the love that I have for my career is in competition with the love I have for my wife and my children. And I think it's been a balance that I've struggled with over time. That was particularly true when I was in the dean's office. So I would say, not that that's a problem with the university or my career, but it's a problem that I think people that are committed to work in a very significant way do have to think about trade-offs in other parts of their life. I'm going to have much more time to deal with my family and connect with my family in the coming years. So hopefully I will make up for that.
Yes, something to look forward to. What advice would you have for someone who is interested in entering your field? If it's a prospective student or someone interested in pursuing a graduate degree, what advice or wisdom would you like to share with them?
Obviously, there's a difference between entering as a student and entering as a faculty member. Although I would say perhaps the most important thing is curiosity. Academic institutions are filled with people that are exploring things, are interested in ideas, are open to talking. The worst thing you can do is to shut down and stay alone and not connect with other people. So I would say being curious and related to being curious, I think breadth is also relevant. In today's world, there's an enormous pressure on specialization, and that's important. We want to work with and trust people who know what they're doing, and that's not to be discounted. But I think breadth is also very relevant, particularly as one moves later in their career where they're dealing with a much broader set of issues and people. I think having the ability to connect meaningfully with a very diverse set of people is also really important. So, a lot of people sometimes call me the liberal arts guy in the business school because I believe we learn a lot from history. I think we learn a lot from the arts. And I think that's not irrelevant. It's not wasted time if one wants to have a business career. And I think that would be true in many areas. So I think being open to new people and new ideas is really critical. And I think that's true throughout one's life. I look at my life, I was much more specialized when I started. That may be one reason I got the job. But I think when I look at myself today, some of that early work is still there for me. But I have so many other interests. When people look at the books in my office, they say, this doesn't look like a business school. This looks like somebody in the history department or in philosophy or in the sciences. And I don't feel I need to apologize for that. Say I'm superficial because I'm broad. I also respect depth. So that would be my advice.
What would you say is the most gratifying part of the career you have chosen?
I've been extraordinarily fortunate. First of all, I love this university. It has been very supportive of me. One illustration of that is I've thought over time, no one has really ever said no to me. They may have said, Harry, that's a dumb idea, or Harry, that will never work. And in some cases, they were right, but not in all cases. And I have a great debt to this university for what it has allowed me to become. I remember once three people came into my office and wanted me to have the business school start a full-time program in Andorra. It was a crazy idea. There's no way we could do it, but following my long held advice, I didn't say no. And as it went on, it ended up what now has created our international programs for our executive education programs, located now in London and Hong Kong and Chicago. So This university has been a place that doesn't kill ideas, but really works on ideas to see what might be possible. I think I've also learned that small things matter. It isn't often what's written about in terms of universities or in business organizations. It's the big decisions, buying a company or so forth. But I realize that the small things and the way we engage with others and the conversations that we have every day are really terribly important. And I think the university context, and particularly the University of Chicago, those conversations that might seem small often are the beginning of ideas that are unbelievably generative of really new discoveries. So I've been in the right place, the right time, for the right person.
That is about all the time we have today. So, Professor Davis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Professor Davis, for your time. And course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more. See you around.